Ready,
Yes,
ready.
sir. All right. Welcome to the Contrast Podcast. Makoto Eyre. Hamamoto. Where does the Hamamoto come in? Oh, that's where I'm always like,
That's
do I throw it in there or not?
yeah, no, it's cool. It's my mother's maiden name. So my middle name used to be John. And I felt I felt like the Japanese side of my family had to be represented a little bit more. And I just kind of liked the way the name sounded. So kind of like a self-branding as well. Makoto Hamamoto Air seemed to roll off a little bit more, roll off the tongue than
Yeah, yeah.
Makoto Chan Air. Yeah.
It's got a much nicer like originality to it, more unique, I
Yeah.
guess. So yeah, could you tell us? We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but could you tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about yourself and yeah, what you've been going through until now?
Yeah, sure. So, I right now I'm moving towards or about to start a position at this company, Blue Origin, which is, for those that don't know it, it's essentially Jeff Bezos's SpaceX, right? So it's a company it's a commercial company that's looking at I guess commercial company is redundant. It's a company that's looking at commercializing space, right? So it's a launch provider at the moment, but it's looking at, okay, well, once we get into space, what other things are we going to do out there? How are we going to profit? Um, and I'm joining Blue Origin in November as the official title is Habitat Distributed Systems Engineer. And that's a long way of saying space architect plus some engineering stuff. Um, and uh, that begs the question: what is space architecture? And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's creating habitats for humans in space. The way I arrived at this was, I mean, I went to Rhode Island School of Design, graduated in 2014, went for architecture, and I worked as an architect in Seattle for about 3 years at this firm called SKB Architects, where I learned how to be a professional, learn how to write emails properly, learn how to speak with contractors properly, and learn some essential aspects of architecture. I mean, architecture school touches on how to think and how to conceptualize form, um, how to uh, keep a design consistent. Um, but working as an architect taught me how to detail those things into reality, and really the devil's in the detail. So you can have the most beautiful form, but if your detail is no good, then the architecture itself is going to feel okay, lackluster. You're going to feel like something's missing. So that was a great time, and the my bosses there, the principals of the firm, were super accommodating. They taught me a lot. But in that time, I still felt like I was missing something. I wasn't having an impact on humanity that I wanted to, and I was missing information. I was missing the ability to enact those kind of ambitious goals. Um, and one of those ambitious goals was kind of looking at the building momentum of this second space age and wanting to be a part of it. So I thought, maybe I should learn some engineering to kind of augment my design background. And so after about 3 years in the architecture and construction industry, I pulled out and put myself back in school for mechanical engineering at the University of Washington. Um, so there was actually 1 year in there where I was at this place called the North Seattle College, or the North Seattle Community College. They've been trying to rebrand themselves out of being a community college, but that's what they are. They shouldn't hide it. It's a
Yeah,
good thing.
community colleges are awesome too.
It was an essential stepping stone for me. Like I would not have been able to make it without them. So yeah, I think that was a great part, and I'm just now kind of peeling out of that phase. So that took about 2.5, 3 years to bring in that portion of my education. And in that time, worked on some really interesting projects. Had a lot of fun. We were starting to talk about that competition in the desert. There are a few other things worked on, like this thing that we call the photobioreactor to help capture carbon dioxide.
Hmm.
and a few other things. So yeah, that's I guess the somewhat long version.
Yeah,
Went on
no,
a few
no, no.
tangents there, but
That's a good little chunk, so people can get some idea of why we're talking to you. So yeah, I have a few questions based on that. But Fedor, do you have anything you want to ask first?
Very funny question, because it's like it feels very professional. The aura is full of, just details and stuff. So I just imagine an engineer in space. Yo, dude, is there any chance that we're gonna build an air tube like in Futurama that gonna, transfer us to Mars or something?
like a space elevator sort of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, that's fine. So definitely not an air tube that will send us to Mars, because the distance
Too
between
far, yeah.
Earth and Mars is always changing, right? I mean, not only is it too far, but our orbits around the sun are going to be different. So there are moments in our orbits where we're on opposite sides of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you have like an insanely flexible air tube that you can direct around the sun so it doesn't get burned, uh, so that one might be a little difficult.
I
Um,
expect Trump has one.
yeah, maybe, maybe. Um,
But
but
yeah, yeah.
like the space elevator is something that people have been talking about for a while. It comes up often in like science fiction, um, and it seems like there are a lot of good things going for it, right? In that it seems like from the calculations that people have done, I haven't really looked that much into it, but it would make launching things into orbit much cheaper,
Mm,
which is great because that's kind of the main barrier to entry. So the effort right now that SpaceX and Blue Origin is really focusing on is bringing launch costs down. Um,
mm,
so space elevators can do that dramatically. However, there aren't any materials that we know of that would be able to provide that kind of structure. Um,
mm,
if you tried to build it from the ground up, I don't know what altitude this would happen, but there reaches a point where, um, like if you build it out of steel, the steel itself just won't be able to support
yeah.
its own strength, let alone like a thing that's traveling up it. And so at least not a steel like rod, right? So you would have to then change the diameter of it, and that starts to bring in some really weird questions about how you have a thing traveling up and down this thing that has a
Yeah.
varying diameter. And then there's the talk of using like carbon nanotubes or carbon fiber. Uh, so carbon fiber is obviously a material that exists right now that people use all the time. Carbon nanotubes, not so much, not in like mass manufacturing, or not in like large construction projects like that. And yeah, it just it seems like there would problems would still persist there. The most promising thing that I had heard, and again, like I've only read about these things. I haven't really dived into exactly what or why. And so my knowledge on this is limited and maybe saying a few things incorrectly. But uh, an idea would be to have some massive object, right? Just something that has a good amount of mass in orbit from the Earth, and to have the space elevator tethered between the Earth and this object,
Mhm.
and that object provides the necessary tension. So instead of having a thing built up into space and it experiencing compression all the time, all of a sudden you have this thing that's under tension. And there are actually a lot of materials that function better under tension than under compression. And so
I see.
potentially that can like change some of the structural requirements, but no one has really pushed that far on it, as far as I can tell. Some interesting papers and thought exercises, but I don't think that there are any serious commercial ventures
A
in it.
thought exercise. Brilliant answer, because it's kind of reflect your previous answer on your profession, like being an architect and how everything is connected, detailed, and could be a funny and ridiculous question, but you'll be able to give us such a profound answer. And you got Dude, if I was designated, I would be like, yo, what's the budget, man? I can give you all the money, no problem. Because it feels like,
That's
yeah,
great. Well, then
you
we got to get you some money, man.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and build the budget too. Yeah,
You know,
man.
I wanted to say yeah, I imagine it would be more like a space zip line as opposed to like a tube, from what you said.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Kind of like a space zip line, space elevator sort of a thing. Yeah.
So yeah, speaking of funding, how yeah, you have kind of your own company going, right? Or you're building your own in the process of building your own company, right?
Uh, yeah, yeah. What, which, which thing are you thinking about here?
Your website, it shows like
Oh, the you went to my website,
yeah,
the
of
whole
course.
BioArcos thing.
Yeah, yeah. Is that a
Yeah,
troll
so
or
that's it's funny that you bring that up. Yeah, so the idea there is, well, let's see. Um, I guess the high level idea um, is the world is made up of a bunch of matter, and we currently have a fairly linear economy where we extract different elements, different units of matter um, from the earth in one way or another, process it into some kind of good, consume that good, and after a certain lifetime, a certain life cycle, we dispose of it. Right? Um, Very linear. And when we dispose of it, it's not like that thing quickly disaggregates into usable parts again, right? So it's just like now you just have these plastics or what have you, right? You have these batteries that you just need to leave around. You have these electronics. Um, so that's what people talk about when they say that our economy is not sustainable. Among other things, there's the idea of like the recycle economy, where maybe there are few life cycles, but eventually the thing gets used up. So you buy a bottle of water and you keep the bottle of water as a water bottle. You like refill it a few times over, and then after that you use it to do that trick where you can separate the egg yolk from the egg white. You do that a few times, and then it becomes this crusty thing that's gross, and then you throw it out. Right? It's better than just using it once, but still, the ultimate thing is you throw it out. I mean, you should recycle, but still, I mean, what's happening with recycling now? I don't even know. China's not taking it anymore. So then there's this. So then we step into this other idea that people have started talking about, which is the cyclical economy, where basically once the thing is disposed, then you reintroduce it into the economy in some way as a raw good that can be processed into some kind of consumer good that can be consumed, and then it's disposed into a raw good again, so on and so on. So instead of the water bottle being recycled, the units of the water bottle are then used to make something else, right? And I think that's what we often think of when we think of recycling, but I don't think that happens quite so often. And usually, like when you do remake something with like a water bottle, right? You'll see like people, I don't, what's like they make toothbrushes out of plastic that was the water bottle, but then what happens to the toothbrush, right? It's like, it's still like a one-time cycle sort of a thing. So this idea of a cyclical economy is a good one, but I don't think we've really acted on it all that much. And I think one of the missing links is this idea of disaggregation. I've been like really fascinated by plants and mushrooms lately. Fungi, the just the ability for acids and enzymes to take complex molecules and break them down into essential units that make them usable to plants again. Like that system in and of itself is wonderful. It's fantastic, right? Like we should find methods, maybe physical chemical ones, maybe biological ones, of introducing that into our economy, not just for a sustainable future, but if you're able to take people's trash and then make it into something useful, like you're going to make a ton of money. Is cursing okay on this podcast?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay, all right. I was about to say a fuck ton of money, and I almost stopped myself. So it's like there's an interesting line of thinking there. Now it's easier said than done, right? That's why it hasn't been done yet. It's like, okay, well that's a great idea. Now tell us how to do it. It's like who knows? And there's some people that are looking into it. But I think, you know, the more we kind of commit ourselves to that, the more progress we can make towards it. And there's also that's a very kind of generalized high level view. So you need to kind of start concentrating on particular waste products, particular contaminants, and maybe kind of move forward from there, right? So the most readily available ones, I think, or the ones that like come to mind immediately for people when they think about waste and pollution are going to be trash that you find on the street. It's going to be water pollution, and then it's going to be air pollution, especially carbon dioxide. And so, Tarik, the thing that I think you saw, I think the thing that you're alluding to is this first project for this group called BioArcos, which just means life first, bio being life, and arcos is the root word for architecture, and it just means the first in a hierarchy. But the purpose of BioArcos is to essentially go into this like cyclical economy. We're calling it resource ecology. But we're looking at carbon dioxide specifically, and we're looking at ways of capturing carbon dioxide in a decentralized manner. So there are a lot of companies out there, there are 2 or 3 companies out there that are looking at this thing called direct air capture, where they're capturing carbon dioxide from the air and using that carbon dioxide to like create a synthetic fuel or to feed greenhouses, right? It's an awesome idea, but these things that they're building are massive. They are like industrial scaled units that people wouldn't have in their homes or in their offices, maybe in their breweries, right? But that's like the smaller ones. The larger ones are like it would have to be bought by a municipality and placed on some kind of industrial lot, which is fine, right? Like if we can make that happen, awesome. But it's so large. The threshold for entry seems like it would be pretty high. That I don't know if we would make enough of them quickly enough to actually overcome the issue that we have like 7 years to correct the temperature change that we're going through because of the rising carbon levels. So if instead we're able to promote, and sorry, Tarik, I'm like going on this crazy rant,
it's
but
all right.
if if we're able to encourage or promote behavioral change by the consumer to do the good thing. So instead of like a recycling program where, hey, you should recycle that because it's good for the environment and also because we're going to fine you if you don't, right? It's like, okay, so recycling program worked after like 20 years, 30 years of pushing it. Cool. You look at that and compare it to like Tesla, where they just made people want electric vehicles. Like it went from this niche hippie product, right, where it was feasible, but no one wanted it because it seemed silly, into this like all-time sexy thing that everyone is crazed over. And now like all the car companies are building them. They have incited behavioral change, and people are doing good for the environment. Just not because they're doing good for the environment. They're not being good people. I mean, part of it, but it's mostly because it's sexy, right? They like that image change. They like the way it looks. And so that seems to be like a more sustainable way of inciting sustainable behavior. And so instead of creating these large industrial units that municipalities need to buy, and then you need to tax people in order to like operate them, and maybe eventually the money will come back to the taxpayer or something like that, why not create something that is inherently beneficial to the consumer? So an air purifier, elevated levels of carbon dioxide indoors can actually impair cognitive performance. That sense of like brain fog, that mid-afternoon sleepiness, usually is correlated to elevated levels of CO2 that can atmospheric levels are 400 parts per million. Inside, it can get anywhere from 800 parts per million to even 3,000. A study of schools in Texas showed that 20% of the classrooms exhibited over 3,000 parts per million at peak levels. And this is in classrooms where cognitive performance should be optimal, right? So if we are able to like make that clear to people and provide an air purifier that alleviates that issue, maybe we could start rolling into something that and create an image that is associated with that. Like, hey, this is not only are you making your thinking better, you're also helping the environment. And when people come into your home or come into your office or come into your classroom and they see you using that thing, they're going to have this idea of you. And it'll be an idea that's similar to, one of like driving a Tesla or like buying stuff from your local farmer's market, or, there's an image associated with that.
Right.
There's more marketing that needs to be done there in order to like really tie that image. But I think that there's a lot to be said there. Now, there's obviously a lot that we need to kind of detail out further. I think the tech is what we have the furthest along. I'm excited about the way that we're framing this, but yeah, I mean, I think that we need to really refine how we're going to present that narrative in a manner that is, of course, like genuine. I mean, that is an intrinsic part of the narrative. It just needs to be told correctly. And I'm not necessarily the best storyteller, so I think we just need to start working with others that can kind of bring that into play.
Okay.
Jesus, Tarik,
That's it.
you
It's
know
not a
what?
business yet, though.
I feel like you're talking to a, Dr. Manhattan of recycling right now. You boiled down to like particles, man. Yo, do you know how to stop North Korean nukes to reach the territory of the United States?
Oh, that would be nice. No, man, that's
Oh,
stopping North
don't you know,
Korean
man?
nukes.
North Korea is going away,
Oh,
just like the coronavirus.
did I just get turned sideways?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Adjust
I
yourself.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, we spot hit, man.
Oh
Spot
man.
hit.
Yeah. For the listeners and viewers out there, in case it's not obvious at this point, I'm on my phone. So sorry about that, guys.
Yeah. But
All right, how's that?
so all right. So I got the
Perfect.
idea of what's on the website now. That's a little bit more clear. But in terms of the process of how did you go from a student to starting your own ideas, or like trying to manifest your own ideas? Could you tell us a little bit about that
Uh,
process?
yeah, that's. I mean, I'm still figuring out what it means to be figuring out that process. Um, so, I guess like so. One of the great things about being in academia, um, there are a lot of benefits and a lot of drawbacks. Like after you've worked for a while and you've just kind of seen the demands on your time for just producing things, um, all of a sudden you get to go to this place where all you need to do is learn, right? And I don't know, for a nerd like me, that's like a dream. I want to spend my free time like reading a book, right, or just exploring the the context that I'm in. Not to mix up environment with all the other uses of the term, but there's like an intrinsic curiosity that I like to feed, and so being in school like nurtured that for a while. At one point, it becomes mundane again because things just become normalized. Um, but I think in that kind of a place, you just start naturally thinking of the potential behind the different things that you're learning, right? The possibilities that can exist there. And I think that's part of the excitement of learning. It's like when you're learning calculus, I mean, there's a beauty of the system in and of itself, and that's a nice thing to admire and to really appreciate and to perform and see play out. But at the same time, the question of like, okay, well, what can this tell me about aspects of the world start to become like really playful, and that's there are so many things that can happen, and then you start going down a path and you reach a dead end, or it's like, what, this actually isn't as interesting as I thought, and then you peel back and then you look at something else. And I think with this thing here, it's when I stepped into architecture, like from high school, right? I went to RISD knowing RISD's Rhode Island School of Design. When I went to RISD knowing that I wanted to do architecture, I walked through New York and I remember thinking that cities are a blemish on the face of the earth. And I don't mean that in like we need to get rid of them. I think cities are like one of the ultimate manifestations of humanity. It's an amazing thing that we have. But given how many of us there are and how big we're making these places, we need to build these places for more than one species, right? We need to make it a part of the ecosystem as opposed to separate from it. And so that idea, I think, has always been there. So once that kind of was reintroduced through my mechanical engineering education and my interest in certain life support systems for space, there are ways of supporting life in space that, for the most part, everything that we've done up until this point has been through physical chemical systems. And there's some people that are starting to look at integrating biological systems. That just kind of like set off that thing from high school. I just started looking into that more. I really like playing with the Arduino. Arduino is like a little programmable microprocessor. And so I thought, what a fun little project. I'll make like a little tube of algae, attach a few sensors on it, and see what it does to the environment. And that just kind of kept feeding itself. I talked about it with a few friends. They were interested in it. They hopped on. I talked about it with faculty. They said it would be a good capstone project. So I made it into a capstone that gave it some funding. And eventually it was like, you know what? So I think a number of us that were working on the project already had some kind of entrepreneurial inclinations. And we were like, it would be great if we were able to make this thing into some kind of a commercializable vision. But it's difficult to make things for space right now. The threshold for entry is really high. Even though it's getting lower, it's still very, very high. And there's no market at that. So even if we were able to have all the funds necessary to send our experiments into space, no one's going to use them until we start sending more people into space. So why not find some kind of terrestrial version of it? And so we was like, oh, wow, supporting life in space and sustainability on Earth are actually really similar. A lot of overlap there, and I think that's an important takeaway that a lot of people will overlook. Like the push for spacefaringness does not necessarily mean, and often is the opposite of pushing away from the Earth. A lot of things that, because it's so hard to live out there, it'll expedite technologies that make it necessary for us to correct some of the wrong that we've done here.
Yeah, I see that for sure.
Yeah.
Are you all right,
Fedor?
Fedor?
I'm just like, yo, I'm on Jupiter right now, my thought process is over there. But I have to disagree with you on this academia part. I gotta step in, and
yeah,
you're
please.
lucky. You're a lucky guy. I feel like fuck. Somebody got lucky, got to academia, and boom, it turned out to be a good and really reasonable, solid place to work in. Whereas my friend professor, who also likes Arduino, by the way, got super frustrated and eventually kicked out of academia, and now he's like seeing all of the drawbacks, all this like dark, muddy side of it. So I just want to ask you this question about curiosity. Growing up in New York City, why did you decide to go to pursue this career as an architect in the first place? Like, you've been rumbling around and being like, I don't fucking like this building. We gotta correct it, it's fucking demolish it or something.
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, there are definitely elements of wanting to do good, but I think even before finding that, there's just, I mean, going back into adolescence, right? Like, how do you?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you. Yeah.
Sorry, but just like knowing what you you want to
Want to
do in the
do
first place, right?
exactly.
A lot of things as an adolescent, at least for me, that just seemed really boring. There
Mm.
are other things that were fun. Um, there were intrinsic draws. I don't know if that's a fair depiction. I don't. I honestly, it's difficult
I'm
to
gonna I-
to answer.
I'm gonna help you, man. It's very
All
easy.
right.
At least
Yeah.
now you're gonna hear my take on China, how I got here, and how I got to the point where I decided that actually this major is not that appealing, and
Yeah,
moreover,
and I'd
I
love to hear
decided,
more about your experience in academia too.
yeah, it's fucking crap, but it's another story. But and then
I mean,
during this during this process of recognizing and engaging in academia, I decided that it's just not my plate, and I was like, yo, Tarik, do you know anything that could probably fit myself in terms of like profession? And Tarik goes like, what do you like to do the most? I was like, yo, I like talking. I like talking to people. I like to get to know them better, get their stories, and boom. And the I would say, like, to make this long story short, that it was my inaccurate, or rather, I don't know, yeah, decision in which I was like, I completely did not know what to do with my life in March this year, 2020, and it's been like the third year of school. So, like, yeah, from the beginning, my mom actually sent me to China. She was like, Russia is not doing great economically. Yeah, China, all right, Far East, you're going. I was like, all right, what major? She goes like, computer science. Right now I feel like she made it, out of nowhere. She was in it. She got her computer broken or something, and then the computer scientist or something in our house. And I was like, all right, but no problem. So I went, I started studying Mandarin. Then I got rolled into this university, Zhejiang University in Hangzhou. It's like close to Shanghai, about like 50 miles away. And
Hmm.
after being here for like 3 years, 3.5, I realized that it's just not for me. you know, I don't really get that excitement. And I can see that you've been getting it a lot, as the matter of
Hmm.
how detailed and really fascinating all of the stories you're telling to us, audience. But from my side, I would be only complaining about it. Yo, dude, you weren't with us. Like when I was complaining, telling all shit about like Chinese education.
Oh
Yeah,
no, Tarik.
Keep going, keep going.
We
Chinese
fell.
education system. Did you spill over, man?
Yeah, just a little coffee. It's all right.
And I just, in this desperation, I decided to, all right, I have still 2 more years to go, and I gotta do
Yeah.
something with my life. Otherwise, I'm not gonna be as professional as Mako. I thought to myself this question. So
Did you leading into this this recent round in academia? Had you what were you doing before?
before I was
Because I
in
think
military school, a cadet school to be specific. You
okay,
know, so
so
yeah.
that might have a large part in it. My first round through academia, like my time at RISD, um, was less of a. It was less like genuine curiosity and more. I think at the time it was like this kind of odd ego-driven thing,
Mm.
and it was probably one of the hardest times of my life. Um, was pretty depressed at certain points. Really didn't know how I was going to finish it or succeed. Felt like I was like kind of failing all the time. And for the first half of my time there, like 2.5 years, architecture is a 5-year program. For the first 2.5 years, I think I was actually pretty close to failing. Like it was really really hard. Um, and I think it wasn't until like I had that solid work experience being in like the professional realm
Mm.
that the appreciation for academia really started to rise, and just what it means to have time to learn. Um, because when leading up to my time at RISD, all I knew was school. Um, so there might be an element of that, like just contrast, right?
Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
yeah,
The Contrast Podcast.
there it is.
But you're right. I like this comparison. The contrast between your story and mine. Your story being kind of you've been walking around it. Barking at the right bush. Whereas I'm and like completely didn't know what to expect from China, how to operate here. And luckily, I met Tarik along the way. And he was like, yo, you're not living the life correctly, my brother. Come on, I'm going to show you. What is it about?
How did you guys meet?
Yeah, the story. It's gonna be told like 1 million times on this podcast.
Yeah, Tarik, please.
I'm sorry. I mean, if it's
No,
if
no,
you
no,
guys
no, no.
come back
It's
and
it's that it's like a
go listen to
practice.
it.
It's a practice at this point. Now we know how to tell it really quickly. So, a long story short, I was in China about what was that 2 years ago now, 2.5, close to
Two and
three.
a half.
Yeah, it's 3 now, right? Or 2?
It's free.
Yeah, 3.
2017.
3 years ago, I was in China for my school program, which I was writing my thesis, and I was in this international dorm in Hangzhou, looking for something to do, looking to explore, looking to meet people, as I always do. And I signed up for this breakdancing class because these Russian guys, or this Russian guy, was hosting it, and I just wanted to learn more Russian at that time. So I went, I didn't really expect much, but a guy just walked over to me during the class and he was like, "Hey man, where are you from?" And I was like, "New York." And he was like, "New York? Oh my God, amazing, amazing." Gotta find out more about this place, tell me. So,
Yeah, that's right.
and as a good New Yorker, I told him all the amazing stuff about our city. Look, I told him some of the negative sides too, quite often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. I remember super vividly now. The good side about it is like when we were drinking, in front of the supermarket, and Tarik had been like kind of drunk. Yeah, gotta admit, like jumped up and like took a leaf from the tree. He goes like, "Look at the tree, In New York, you have all different kinds, of leaves, and if one gonna die, others gonna know how to survive." So diversity
Sick.
been learned the first, advantage, or rather the charm of New York is diversity, and that's
Hmm.
what I got. And it took me like 2 years to really understand and imply this not imply, but really personalize it in my experience. Also living in a international dorm and hanging out basically with small New York, in this corner.
Hmm.
But yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to learn something about China with a Chinese person. It's been like on and off, and all of people that I met who told me, who taught me, guided me in terms of China, how to live here, were all not Chinese, foreign people, and
Hmm.
that's like
Why do you
it's
think
it's
that is?
uh it's a very simple explanation, like the story that how we met. So basically, it starts from the concept of Chinese civilization and how they managed to save to preserve it till this day because of this enclosedness. They were never open for any sort of like foreign relationship besides trade, of course. The Silk Road and stuff. But in terms of foreign influence, um, I don't remember those times. So it's just a matter of survival for them. I'm speculating, right? I'm just like I kind of understand their mentality now, and it feels like if you're gonna come closer, man, it's gonna be a fucking burst off. You're gonna blow up right at the spot, you know, because we don't know how to encounter, how to really communicate or coexist. That's a better word. So as I got this point, I tried to. All right, then what should I do here now? Learn some Chinese. By the way, my Chinese is really rudimentary. It's like I barely can speak. I can listen, my greatest skill, in all foreign languages, and I can read as well. But as for really having fun with Chinese people, with Chinese culture, kind of flexing with it, nah. You know, I'm like I'm an outsider. So yeah, that's my story, you know, and like, you know, taking all of these things into account, we get to Chinese academia, you know, and I know a perfect guest who could explain it, and I'm gonna send you the link for this podcast, you know, with Dima.
Dima.
Yeah. I said it's a friend of mine.
I'm trying to. I was looking through a few. Initially, I was looking through the clips and spotting conversations on there, but then I saw that there were full episodes, and I
everybody who's listening, go through the clips first, and then you like.
Yeah, there is no Dima episode yet.
Yeah, not
the
yet.
guys coming.
Okay,
it's my like also one of my best friend. I got two, Tarik and Dima, a guy from Amman and Professor. I call him Professor from Russia, but he'd been living in UK for like 20 years, so he's kind of like British. And yeah, with those two guys, I've been getting my way here, you know, trying to maintain this lifestyle, understand some high level concepts, you know, not about the environment, but still about all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's the story of my life.
That's it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because it reminds me a fair amount of Japanese on my mother's side, and back when I was in like the third grade, I think we moved to Japan for about 2.5 years. We lived in Tokyo, and I don't think I really appreciated this at the time, but I remember hearing my father, who's white, talk about it, and noticing it when I returned and was older, to be able to just observe my context a little bit better. Like that sense of being an outsider is very present in Japan as well, right? Like they're very welcoming, right? And notice that I'm saying like they, right? Like even though I'm half Japanese, I'm clearly Americanized, and I'm treated as an outsider when I'm there, which I guess, to be fair, culturally I am, but they're great hosts, right? You're treated like a king when you're in Japan. You're never welcomed in. Like you won't see behind the curtain. You like don't become a part of the community. So there are little things that are fun. My parents love to tell this story. When I was younger, I think the only time I really didn't like McDonald's, except when we were in Japan, because they like made the burgers perfectly, and there was something about that was like tastier. But I didn't like pickles and onions on my burger, so I would ask for them to not have it on there. First time I went, it was with my father, and he made the order, and he speaks Japanese like fluently. The response was like, "Oh, we have this special order," right? They went to the back and made this fresh burger. The manager packaged it and brought it out and was like, "Thank you very much," and handed it to my father. And it was like this whole production, right? And my father, Giles, my father, he was like, "Oh, this is crazy," and so he like told my mother about it, told my grandparents about it. It was just like this funny event. And so my mother was like, "Oh wow, I want to see this." And so next time my mother and I were walking by the same McDonald's, we went up and she made the order, and the person behind the counter was like, "What?" Like the contrast of experience, because in that mode, because my mother's Japanese, they weren't being like the full host, but at the same time, so that's like that first encounter, but at the same time, in terms of like being able to really penetrate the community and be a part of it, um, it would always be surface level with my father, where my mother would be able to like really integrate, be able to become one of the community. Um, so yeah, it's just and again, like I've
Yeah, that's an
sensed
interesting
that for
story.
myself
That's
as well.
very interesting. It's a interesting correlation between, as I just told you, my experience in China and your being a little kid in that restaurant. It's like, yeah, I am that kid. Sometimes I want to be heard, to be forgiven, that I'm not yellow, that I don't really look or speak that
Yeah.
Chinese, and sometimes I just want to be treated like that, the king. But it's interesting because, like, lately I've been getting this response because I like to work out, do some calisthenics outside, and
Mm,
I found a way how
it's
to
good.
really, yeah, how to get into this Chinese culture in terms of, yeah, on my terms. Like, I've been just showing how to do more proper exercise to Chinese, and they've been thankful. They've been asking me how to do that. So I guess, yeah, first lesson that we all should learn, all audience, is when you're going to another country, don't be a tourist. Don't expect that you're gonna
Hmm.
be beloved by all of those people. You just gotta throw this away and, like, all right, another white guy. All right. And the second one, I guess, regardless of your language skill or how much stuff you know about the history and blah blah blah, you gotta bring some, like, contribution, like being myself, yeah, pointing out some mistakes, and like they're doing the skipping pull-ups, and it's like
Hmm.
at the moment it started to be super annoying, and I was like, yesterday I was like, stop, motherfucker, yo, no, you're not gonna do that way, you gotta do it slow. And by the end of the workout he was like, yo, thank you, man, and really meant to me something. I felt like, yo, finally I got some sort of a connection, not because I've been, super expert in Chinese or something. I've been, like, really struggling to explain how not to keep, but just a simple, you know, hold his body, like hand gestures, and good treatment, and
Yeah,
really care about something. That's it. But yeah,
that's
man,
interesting.
Tarik
So,
probably also had maybe some.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, of course. I wanted to say, yeah, that these kind of cultural exchanges, right? This is like the phenomenon that occurs based on history and just how the world kind of formed us in different places. But we are moving towards the future, right? And so basically what I wanted to grab hold of what both of you touched on is these kind of old traditional ideas compared to the future that our generation is trying to make. And that's another thing that's kind of unique about this podcast is, first of all, most people who are doing podcasts nowadays are far older than us. They've accomplished things in life already, and that's what's kind of like the draw to their podcasts is like people know them already and they want to hear how they interact with certain people. But our podcast is with a 21-year-old and a 30-year-old from two different countries talking to people from all over the world about their life experiences and finding the connections and revealing like the real nature of the issues that maybe a person in Uganda or in India is facing compared to someone in Australia or Thailand, you know. there is a lot of connections with problems, and it also relates back to what you were talking about with academia and how you found your way into engineering. It's like these kind of small realizations that people don't fit into a particular group or particular subject that maybe they've been recommended or people have been saying is their best means economically to lift yourself up. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, do you think that in the future this kind of national divide, these cultural misinterpretations, misunderstandings, that they are slowly gonna go away? You know, as we're moving more into this technology era, like, is the fact that Japanese people react in a certain way to foreigners, is that just a matter of time? Like, is that just a matter of an old way of thinking? Because I think modern Asians are becoming a lot more open, and so yeah, what do you think about that?
It's so hard to say, man. Think, wow, maybe someday, but not anytime soon. If it's, I mean, we might be making steps in the right direction, right? Um, and let's see. I guess
Well,
the
let's start with
this is like going through like a lot of stuff, but yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. Um, so like starting with like say just the example of Japan or China, which I'm not as in tune with. I've been to China I think once for 10 days or so. Uh, it's that while there might be a changing perspective with like the youth, um, different outlook on the world. I think that the draw of culture and tradition, just like the subconscious hold that those things have on the individual, is pretty strong. Um, Maybe I'm putting one thing in one place that it shouldn't be, but something that I've been doing lately, just kind of not purposefully, but I read some James Baldwin. I watched Do the Right Thing, um, and listened to this autobiography by this economist Thomas Sowell, who's this African American born in the 1930s, and this like pretty incredible career. Um, the thing that each of these sources had in common was that they provided insight to very complicated the very like complicated dynamic that exists African Americans in the United, I mean, in America, right? African Americans, like just what it means to be Black in America, and there were things, a couple things that changed, but the heartbreaking thing was like there were so many things about what was being discussed in those things that are being discussed right now, right? And I feel like, I mean, looking at the millennials and Gen Z, I mean, I think that we encapsulated, especially Gen Z, are way more enlightened and are moving in the right direction. But how the fuck are we talking about the same fucking things now? Right? That's crazy. And I think like it just, it might just be that, you know, need to be a little bit more patient in the fact that we have these new generations growing up. Like maybe in the next 20 years, we'll see like a dramatic change, hopefully. Right. But again, it seems like we're moving in the right direction, but I do think that there is something to be said about like, even with the conscious, deliberate attempt of breaking with tradition, breaking with the zeitgeist of the previous time. There's, for some reason, right, because we're, I think, community beings, this subconscious pull in ways that, I mean, this is where we start going into like subconscious biases, right? So I think that it's awesome that we're aware of it, that we're talking about it, and that we're deliberately trying to change things so we are a more accommodating group of people. And that seems to be happening mostly, as is the opposite, right? The very populist nationalist movement is also a budding thing that seems to be maybe a direct response to this. But yeah, I don't know. I have a it's so complicated, and I like don't think I've read enough about all of this to have too informed of a perspective, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but
yeah, I got you.
I guess
man.
the way to wrap it up is I think there's hope, but I think it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I like your thought process actually, the way you unfolded all ideas, and if it's not related to something, you're trying to look at it on this macro level, you know. Mark, I've been looking at macro level, yeah, rhyme shit. And if it's not getting into it, you're trying like a good academic, avoid it or dodge it a little bit. I know it's complicated,
Well,
but
my dodges, I try to be honest with my dodges and just state when I don't know a thing.
Yeah.
But I like it, man. It's very
I'm fine
honest,
with speculating, but
yeah, like all scientists probably. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
your guys' job.
but we profit here on speculation, so please unleash your speculation.
Well, if you want a little prophetic or whatever the word is, let's say we resolve all of this here. I mean, the next problem is when we start having space people on the moon, people who are living in space stations, people on Mars. I mean, the beautiful tragedy will be we have peace on Earth where there's no more biases, but damn those space people. Their elongated bodies for having less gravity. It's like there's I don't think that there will ever be a shortage of creating some sense of the other, as heartbreaking as that is. But we can reduce the number of like others and continue to grow what it means to be a community.
It just a random idea just got into my head, and so I'm gonna be very brief in order how to resolve this problem of racial inequality as you guys talking about. I guess the first one, being a Russian person, I would say that people in general are not exposed to struggle with other races. For example, Chinese and Russian, right? White guy, either doing these pull-ups, sweating, struggling, or me and Tarik in St. Petersburg, like 700 kilometers, the second capital of Russia. That's how we call it, the North capital. Struggling to find a place to smoke weed, or try to to film something, to conduct.
This is an actual story.
Yeah. That's the struggle, man.
Sorry.
And that's how, when you struggle, you start to develop this compassion. And on the one hand, we have this fucking furious climate change, which could be real, like it is a big problem, but in 10, 15 years, it's just gonna be, intolerable. And I have this belief when it's gonna happen and hit really bad, that's what's gonna unite people. Because this misery, either it's a war or like famine or a struggle, real struggle, that's what brings people united, regardless of any attributes. That's the first point. The second point, yeah, we just gotta promote interracial porn in school. That no, I'm just kidding. I'm just
School.
kidding. But like, yo, I started to watch that shit, as I was like, I don't know, 16 or something. I just had this curiosity, like, yo, but how do like other nations fuck, But yeah, it's off the top. But
That's great, man. It's very worldly of you.
The second point I would just say, yeah, interracial marriages. And you've been a good example. And I have a question personal, because we've been debating this with Tarik. So Tarik's initial point was like, we could reduce the number of those inequalities by just getting married with all kinds of people, promote this diversity. So to what extent do you agree with this statement? I might be misinterpreted, but I guess
it's close enough.
the
Close
point.
enough.
Like most problems, there isn't going to be the one thing. That seems like one of the essential tools on the tool belt to eliminating or significantly reducing biases. I guess the reason I say that is while being with someone that is culturally different from yourself can provide you insight into what that culture is. You as the observer, the person that is learning about this, can take that as you can make the effort to understand it as genuinely as possible and know like where your boundaries are, know your place, and be just an honest agent in that interaction. That's still not. I don't know how to encapsulate that part. It'll be easier to define the other side, which is almost exoticize it, right? Like even though you are familiar with all the details, it is still a separate thing, and I feel like that has existed before. Another way of putting this is, like if I were dating someone that's black, right? No matter how much of their day-to-day experiences they tell me and how much I can start to, I always mix up sympathize or empathize. No matter how much I can attempt to kind of appreciate what it means to go through those details and feel for that person, right? Genuinely. I won't know truly what it means to be in that spot. And likewise, they won't know what it truly means to be in my spot. And that divide will always be there. We have the foresight and perspective to appreciate that divide exists and know that our ability to cross that bridge is somewhat limited, but still make the best attempt to be, I suppose, I don't like to use terms that are commonplace, but an ally, right? Just be a support mechanism in some ways, be an appreciator, just be like a genuine actor, then you can move in the right direction. But if you, yeah, again, this is a place where I'm completely speculating and I don't know. I think that would be an essential part of the tool belt, and that would help make a lot of changes. But that in and of itself, without the proper perspective changes in society, necessarily perspective change.
Well, let's zoom out.
This is revealing the need for me to talk about these things more, because it's like the concepts, like when you're describing these things, the concepts are coming to mind and I'm excited to provide a response, but I don't know what words to ascribe to these concepts, and I'm finding it really difficult to articulate. So wow. If there's one thing I'm taking away from this, is I need to talk and write about this more, because it's hard. It's really hard to talk about.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, and probably for Fedor, not so much, right? Because actually we talk about this quite a lot, and not exactly always so directly, but in a lot of things. That's kind of like our whole business model essentially. But yeah, so what I wanted to say is I want to zoom it out a little bit, right? Because a lot of what we're kind of discussing is very nationalized to the U.S. and the U.S.'s racial problems, whereas there's racial problems in a
Mm,
lot of countries all over the world, and each context is slightly
mm,
different. However, the fundamental issue of the problem we see constantly, and I guess maybe that's my experience as a journalist and reading through probably hundreds of thousands of articles about these kind of things, is that it's mostly about education and exposure. It's like, how were people taught? What did they grow up into in their formative years? What were they told by their parents or from movies, from media, stereotypes, things around them? All of these like small factors play into this reason why people divide themselves based on these things, and then they get stuck. I think another big problem is that they get hard stuck in these cultures. They don't see it, or they've never been educated on the level where they understand that culture is something that you acquire, and that over time
Exactly.
you can absorb a new culture. You can take things that work for you or fit with your identity, and you can and then you have to also recognize things that won't apply to you because of your identity. And every person has to do that exploration. But the fact is that they need to be educated. They need to understand that first, and they need to be exposed to people who wouldn't give them only one perspective. So essentially, they need to not be in an area where there's only struggling poor people of a certain race, so that they get this image that all people of this race have this poor struggle, and that's why they do these things. So that's why I was saying that this kind of combination, this marriage between races, or these building and fostering these relationships between not even just races but just different nations, would eventually lead to this kind of easing of racial tensions, easing of these cultural intolerances. So yeah. Anyway, so taking what that being said, and we've all kind
uh,
of waited.
that's a great point. Um,
All right, we're still getting a little bit of lag, but
cool.
let's just try and get through it. So right, so you were starting about diversity in the industry. You said that it's slowly improving in terms of racial diversity.
Yeah, so I had interned with NASA over the summer, and something that really impressed me about that experience. NASA is organized into different branches. Um, there are a bunch of ways that they're organized in, but each branch kind of covers a different segment of um, what they do. And so I was kind of like in the human factors segment. They're called SF3. Um, and we had weekly branch meetings, right? Where we'd all call in. Um, and the first one that I joined in on was early July. So it was maybe towards the latter end of the uh, the recent surge in Black Lives Matter um, protests, um, and just kind of the nation reckoning with um, just the tragedy that happened with George Floyd, um, and Breonna Taylor, and uh, I guess in that first branch meeting, we had spent the entire hour discussing race and what it means to be at NASA um, as a person of color, and more specifically, what it means to be at NASA as a black person. And I was really impressed that a venue that is typically given to probably more technical discussions um, was given to provide a platform for these kinds of discussions, and they went on for several weeks because they're obviously super complex and you can't touch on everything in these limited periods of time. So uh, the fact that that existed was great. There was a lot of listening, and one of the main takeaways, the Black population is woefully underrepresented. What do you mean? Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks. Um, is woefully underrepresented, but there were still voices that could be heard. So that was a good encounter. At Blue Origin, we have a lot of I guess community groups that represent a bunch of the different demographics that exist at Blue to kind of allow for cultural events, community events, to find, I suppose, that common ground. So there are deliberate attempts being made, which is great. But just looking at like who is in the industry, it's not super diverse yet, right? One move that I think is a very successful one, and this lines up with I think your line of thinking, Tarik. It is giving the opportunities for like underrepresented demographics who are in leadership positions to have more publicity so that the next generation of engineers there are greater opportunities for the next potential generation of engineers for underrepresented demographics to see themselves as engineers as they're going through training, right? As they go through academia. I think a large part of the problem, like we don't want to force people into a place. We don't want to make people feel like they are coming in simply because of their demographic either, or their who they are. Like it's a lot of it has like you man, sorry, this is, like I said earlier, surprisingly difficult to talk about, but by providing that kind of that visible connection, like okay, here's a person who I feel like represents who I am in a leadership position of a field that I aspire to be in. Had I not seen that otherwise, perhaps there would have been less incentive or less of a drive to get into it. I think that whole effort is something that engineering as a whole has been better about putting forward in both the professional realm and in academia. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Academics. Yo, Marco, yeah. I wanna ask, a little less complicated question, and I'm sure you'll be
Yeah. Thank
super
you.
elaborate on this one. So you're a quite impressive person, I've been really, really excited talking to you. So I just want to know, right? What is your personal philosophy? What standards do you set to yourself? How do you achieve goals? What is motivation? All of this stuff, basically.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and that's something I've been asking myself quite a bit lately. I think the past 3 years after I peeled off from architecture, I became very what's it called? Like very very hermit, right? I spent time with myself and was really focused on my intellectual development.
Mm.
Am I popping in and out?
No, no, no. Keep going. Keep going.
Your screens were kind of okay. Um, so yeah, I was very focused on my intellectual development and was trying to find ways of moving barriers to that out of the way. So one thing that I started doing regularly was like running, right? I found that physical activity um, really helped to bake in difficult information to like process. So after doing a good amount of studying or after working up a good amount of stress or before a big interview, big test, a big presentation, I would always go for a run. It released stress, it cleared my mind, and it helped bake in a lot of the things that I tried to remember. And it also lined up this general state of mind that I found very useful across the board, which is like that feeling of being frustrated and fed up is a barrier to get through in and of itself or an obstacle to get past in and of itself. Like it's an indicator that you're going in the right direction. You just need to push a little bit more. Like when you're on
Mhm.
your run, right? Once you've had a couple of really good runs, you know when you've cheated yourself out of one, right? Like if you
Yeah.
don't go quite hard enough, you'll come back home and you don't like have that feeling that of just being almost refreshed. It'll still feel good, but it's not quite there. Similarly,
Yeah.
doing practice problems out of a textbook, right? It's like I'll know if I've done enough because there reaches a point where I grow frustrated, and there's a similar state of mind. I mean, one is physical exertion and the other is an intellectual one, but
Yeah, exactly.
it's that
Exactly.
persistence of like pushing through that for some reason mentally is very, very similar. And I found practicing that in as many areas of my life as possible uh, to be great at moving forward in that goal. However, um, something that I've come to appreciate a little bit more is um, not always being so on, right? Because that, I mean, and it's almost paradoxical because in order to push yourself constantly, you need to remind yourself to push yourself. And it's difficult to turn that off and to turn it back on. It's easier to turn on and just leave it on, right?
Yeah.
But it's good to turn it off at times so that you could allow, like, I mean, there's the whole like being happy component, right? That's always a great thing. But I think also just in terms of like trying to progress yourself forward, giving yourself the space to tap into your subconscious is vital, and that's super difficult to do, right? You can't at will bridge into your subconscious. So um, having free time is really one of those moments, right? There's a reason that a lot of revelations happen when you're in the shower or when you're on a walk or when you're on a run or when you're getting groceries, right? It's there are so many more. Since you studied computer science, you might appreciate this kind of language, right? There's almost like a parallel processing that's happening in the subconscious, right? You have
Yeah.
multiple lines of thinking, of processing that are happening simultaneously in your subconscious, where in your conscious mind, there's typically only one track. It's the thing that you're focusing on in that moment, right? And so being able to like say program certain streams of the subconscious, right? Just by maybe writing down, right? I love writing. I think by vocalizing an idea that helps as well. Thinking about it. I think that's where prayer actually is really interesting. I'm not a religious person, but I think prayer has a lot to do with speaking to that unknown part of yourself that we can call God, right? The subconscious almost is like this God. It's this unknown entity that controls you.
Exactly.
um, you like program it by just repeating this idea, and over time, like in showers when you're lounging on the couch, like your subconscious will just like spit something back at you and you're like, whoa, that's actually that's great. That really helps to answer some of the questions I've been asking. I've been trying to write
Exactly.
down my dreams more because of that. um, so yeah, I don't know, man. A lot of the things that I do are focused on like trying to make myself better, but there's always a question mark as to like whether or not you're doing it properly and if there's the right balance, right? Something like a goal of mine is to be able to spend an hour just sweeping out front, right? Sweeping the front door, and to enjoy it completely and not be distracted by other tasks. Not think about what I'm doing later in the day and just enjoy the fact that I've made the front porch or front door or driveway or whatever it is that you're sweeping look a little bit better. And that's it. Right? I
Yeah.
get very restless. So, yeah, being a little calmer, I guess, is the next thing for me to work on.
Huh. Interesting. Do you meditate?
Not enough. I do it on and off. I'll, I find meditation in the morning to be really pleasant. Um,
Exactly.
usually I need to do it after like a light workout, otherwise I'll fall back asleep. But it's uh, fantastic to do, especially if you have like a nice window so you could look outside. One form of meditation that I've actually really enjoyed is you start by focusing on your breathing, and that's kind of you're purposefully homing in your realm of consciousness to something that's very simple so that you can kind of block out other things. Um, but doing that too deliberately, I've found is not like that can kind of help um, in in the short term, but if you try to meditate for a little bit longer, like more than a few seconds, really, right? Um, then that deliberate effort to like focus on one particular thing is almost egging on other thoughts to start flooding your mind. And so you start thinking about these other things, and then you kind of feel bad for the fact that you start thinking about these things, and you're like, oh, I can't concentrate. What's wrong with me today? So if instead, like I start focusing on my breathing, and then I think about my breathing and the sounds that I hear, and then I allow the thoughts to come through. I also let them pass, right? You hear that in like meditation apps all the time. That's kind of the thing. But then I like to open my eyes, right? And then this is where I know whether or not I'm like actually in a place that I like to be meditating. I don't know if it's proper meditation, but you look at the world around you and you see the visual field, and instead of identifying objects, you just see it as color and shadow, right? There's just kind of these blobs of things that come into existence. Maybe it helps to blur your vision a little bit, but you're just appreciating the full scope of consciousness and observation, and that's it. um, and the ability to stay in that state is like difficult. It's usually pretty fleeting, but um,
Yeah.
that's why I bring up the window.
Interesting. I don't know why, but I get a sense that in your work environment, you don't really get a chance to talk about your feelings. You don't get it. I mean, like, not professionally wise, but other than profession and all of those crazy concepts that, fleeting around, but actually about yourself, sitting,
Mm.
looking at the window in one spot and just, understanding all what's going on through your mind. And that's why you've been,
Yeah,
it's by my observation, you've been struggling to find a proper words to explain or to give a good, reasonable answers of some sorts, which is been
yeah,
like, yeah. But that's why I don't really like academia, because it is expected from you to be good at something, like one particular. You are a good piece of this gigantic mechanism. But we don't really give a
right.
shit if you meditate or not, or work out, or go for a run, or just masturbate. Yo, you gotta be on time, 9 o'clock. Monday to Friday.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not
No, and
my
that's
style.
actually
Yeah.
that's a fantastic point. I at one point I was going to these like therapy sessions, right? These were actually really great. It was like men's group therapy, right? So over like you have a bunch of people kind of get together and you just talk about what your experience has been being a man in this world, and like usually you just kind of do day-to-day check-ins, but we start to elaborate on certain problems. And I've always considered myself to be in some ways expressive. Like I feel like I can wear my emotions on my sleeve. When I'm uncomfortable, it's very clear. When I'm comfortable, it's very clear. When I'm excited, it's very clear. But exactly as you're saying, it can be really difficult for me to articulate my emotions. And at one point, the person that was like leading these sessions asked me a question to describe like a thing that I had encountered. I forgot exactly what it was, but it was something that didn't feel right, that didn't feel good. And I thought I described it, and then he goes, you described all like the things surrounding the issue, but you never told us like what your emotions were. Right? You're not really you're not providing us what you're not even like comfortable with naming that emotion for yourself, which I found really interesting and really apt. You know, I've always thought that you know, you hear those kinds of things about men sometimes, right? And I've always thought that that was just a thing that you voluntarily turn on or off, and that's just something that I've like kept off. And it's like, you know, it is what it is. And when I want to express something, I can. But in that moment, I realized that okay, well, let me try it again. And I tried articulating it, and he was like, "No, you did the same thing." Like there's an actual barrier, right? Like I don't know how to say it. That's such a weird thing to encounter. Um, so
I got yeah.
that's very astute of you to pick up on. That's completely
It's
on
very
point.
you know what? It's very egotistical, you know, in some levels from your side. And I
Mm,
gotta be really clear because I am the opposite person of yours. My emotions are open free in open free access. You know, anyone could ask me, how did I feel when I was meditating yesterday? I initially started talking about it like to all people because I want to divide these responsibilities. And you've been putting it on your shoulders, you know, because the act when you're speaking about something, a problem, an issue, like, I don't know, a rabbit hole that you got into, is you kind of share, you split the responsibility of that thing between an interlocutor, a person that you're talking to, and yourself. So as you know, it's a practical reason for that because it's easier now to accept, and maybe you would invoke some emotions in other person, or maybe you just ignore that. And it's
mm,
also another emotion because as long as you're in this conversation and you're basically trying to elaborate, as meant to create, to rather produce that emotion out of all described things you just said. It's kind of hard, man, because you don't even know where to start. You were not asked to do that. That's the second point. The third one is just, yo, you not just thinking about the response, but actually how you gonna respond to that one. Once your emotion being exposed to the world, what's the other emotion that's leading
mm,
to that? You know, what is the follow-up emotion? So that's how I feel,
mhm,
you know, and sometimes it actually be like my fucking idea how to be more humble and, you know, not sharing all stuff that I experience, you know. Because, for example, real close one. We had an argument with Tarik about UFC fighting, and I don't know why, but I got a stupid idea in my head, and I didn't know how to solve it. I tried to articulate it, but I still didn't find the way how to get rid of it, you know, how to get over it. And I just shared the story to my friend. And he was like, yo, that's very easy. La 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 la. I was like, yeah, that's right. Not by the answer he gave to me, but the thing that I don't know, like cracked down at some point that I was just like, oh, hold on a second. I just share it. It's not only on my shoulders now. It's fine. It's not a burden anymore. And then I came back to Tarik. I shared it with him about my rabbit hole on him. So he goes like, "Yo, I'm glad you fixed it," and I was like, "Boom, zero emotions now." I'm following and going forward. That's how I feel, man. And oftentimes I don't know, we've never met, but I just get this personal, intimate feeling that once you start to elaborate more to a certain person or like to a group of people, like you just said, you guys have this group meetups, you start to notice that actually it's not even common between all of those, people, but actually in those feelings, you start to recognize yourself, your site, your signature, and you gotta feel proud because you produce that emotion. You gotta like it's not that
Interesting.
fancy all the times, but it's just like, wow, actually, my brain got me into that. You start to reflect on it, and then emotion comes, like this. So that's how I feel about sharing. And
And
I've been having like, yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Yeah, I'm finished. I'm
Sorry,
done.
the lag is making it.
Yeah,
No,
that's
that's such a beautiful description, and it's funny, like hearing you talk about that and watching my response to it, because okay, like that is such it's a beautiful description, and the first thing that I wanted to respond with was an intellectualization of what you were mentioning, like what I wanted to dive into, and I think that this is like super interesting. It's just like how sophisticated our minds are, right? To be able to, like you said, like manifest emotion. That seems like such a crazy thing, but that's almost besides the point of what you were saying, right? This is me being at all of the complexity of it and like um, wanting to just like I don't know, like rant on about that and like maybe dive into some of the details of it and talk a little bit about the neuroscience that's going on there and how is that bridged, like how fascinating that is, and all of that is again just like that's getting away from the actual emotions of of what was being discussed, right? So why
exactly.
is that? And yeah, that's something that I've been exploring a little bit further. I think one thing is and I failed to name this earlier when I was kind of describing all the things that I like to do to kind of keep myself moving forward. Is I think I really, while there's a genuine curiosity and I really enjoy working on things, I find it exhilarating, find it comforting. Um, that is the mode that I like to exist in. At the same time, I think that I also really like judge myself, value myself um, based on like how productive I feel, right? And so that I think is a little bit of a distorted valuing system. Um, it could serve me in a great way in that it could just like drive me like I could be my own feedback loop and just like push really hard in one direction. But that's probably not like the happiest place that I can be. And my partner has actually she's been fantastic about uh, giving me the space and the feedback to kind of correct that a bit and to become a little bit more of a balanced person. Um, still trying to find what the proper balance is,
Exactly.
but
It's
not
needed, man.
yeah.
It's very needed. I've been like into productivity myself, like doing all of this. By the way, I just have a quick advice for you. If you feel like sleepy after each workout, try to do some cold showers, man. The sleepiness will disappear. Like after each workout session, you go shower, you put the cold water, you're done. And
Yeah,
before every single
I like that.
meditation, it's the best. I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do, yeah, go and make some
Cold shower and then
make
meditate.
yeah, exactly. Make some noise, in the shower. Of course.
Yeah, I'll definitely be making noise if there's a cold shower. Man. That's
Yeah, but
last time
but
I
this
had one was in Mexico in like 2012. But
damn. Mexico in 2012, man. We were about to see the apocalypse in 2012. Remember that shit? All speculations, or probably you didn't have it, guys.
Yeah,
Back in Russia, it was like a
December
fucking crazy.
21st, 2012.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I remember that. I never think
I
that
can
those
remember
things are
that.
real though. I'm like, oh yeah, world's gonna end finally, finally. Where's my
I know
baby?
where I was that day too, or that evening. I was having beers with Amos and Breton over
Uh,
on like near Pier 17 on the east side. Um, we are just hanging out, waiting for the world to end, and then it didn't.
yeah, at least you were having beers with Amos,
Yeah, yeah, that was good.
Yeah. But it's wonderful, this conversation, this whole dialogue, all new characters. I've been really fascinated by the number of people that Tarik has spoken to, have met in like New York City, all around the place. And as for me now seeing you as a new guy, a new like fucking, I don't know, a character in my book is like a completely different real, man. I'm trying to understand some of your complexities, your struggles, and I like it. I'm trying just to facilitate this conversation and bring the sauce of it. Like put it in the yeah, I struggle with that. Oh, with that. Oh, me too, actually. Welcome to the
Hmm.
club. So it shows
Yeah.
like we all have same shit. Got the same problems. Yeah, not been heard as much as we wish to be. So I have the same shit, man. I live in the environment where the spoken word isn't valuable enough. Everything is written down, or people want you to write shit, and not like when you're trying to speak out, just to be like casual way of saying hi to somebody. It's oftentimes an awkwardness, the scary look at you, and
Mm.
then you start to feel like, all right, so the reaction was that. What if I'm gonna just go on rant and tell all about my feelings, or like rather discuss the topic with them? It's just gonna be a fucking disaster, man. I can't imagine a demolition of their mindset, in 3 seconds. So I try to humble myself, look around and go and proceed, as Russian God wished. I'm kidding, but yeah, that's basically it. Philosophy stuff.
so
But
yeah, it's interesting. We've covered a lot of different topics, but still one remains for me, which is so what's the big vision? Like we've kind of touched on all the things that you're working on, but like can you just sum it up in terms of like what do you want to accomplish with your career?
I'm here.
Yeah, are you thinking about how to answer that or
No, I don't know if you saw that. On my end, everything just crashed for a minute and it like popped
oh
me
okay.
back on. So
Oh
that
okay,
was
all right.
me
So I
responding to connectivity issues.
all right,
Sorry
so
if I was like grimacing.
no, it's all right.
I think I heard the question. The question was like, what is the big vision?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's yet again a great question. So let's see. Um, there are maybe the way to put it as concisely as possible, as concise as possible, would be significantly altering the way humans live for the better through innovations in the built environment. Right. That's very vague, very broad. but that kind of encapsulates several of the ideas that, or several of the projects that I have, several of the ideas that I'd like to articulate further. Space architecture being one of them, right? We're pushing more and more people, or we're likely going to be pushing more and more people into space in the next several decades. And that's going to require us to significantly alter what it means to be in space. Well, I mean, not even significantly alter, but almost just like flat out define out of nothingness, right? Right now we have the International Space Station, which is a great laboratory, but there have been engineers that I've spoken to that have very aptly described it as living inside of a VCR, right? That's just like what it looks like. So obviously we can't send people, like everyday people, non-professional astronauts, to live in a machine. They need to live in a home. And so we need to really define what it means to be in a home when you're so far away from home, right?
Can I stop
So
you there
there,
though? Because I'm a little bit skeptical.
yeah.
You're gonna have to elaborate a little bit on that. My
Okay.
skepticism is that, do we really need a home? Is that really an essential human value, especially in a task so difficult as like going all the way into space? Do we really need to make it
Sure.
hospitable in that way?
Um, the goal of like Blue Origin is millions of people living and working in space. SpaceX wants to put millions of people on Mars. Um, if we're going to have that many people, that's why like I'm making a distinction between professional astronauts and then other people. Like right now, the people that we're sending out there, like the correct word to use for them would be explorers, right? I mean, they're right now there are scientists that are going back to the same place, but that same place is challenging. They're explorers in the same way that the people that go to the Arctic base or the Antarctic bases are explorers, right? They're going to a challenging place, and there are things about that challenging place that we want to learn, and so the scientists and engineers that we send there learn about that place, and they put up with all the difficulties of what it means to exist there. If we wanted to build a city in Antarctica, it would not be an expansion of um, actually that might be a poor metaphor. There would have to be more creature comforts that we would provide in order to just make it a more accommodating experience. Now, the reason I stopped myself there is because the Antarctic station has actually made a lot of strides in providing some of those creature comforts for the newer scientists. It seems like they're making a lot of progress with that, but the International Space Station is something that's built for like 6 people at a time, right? I think the most that they've had up there at once is 9, something like that. Usually the missions are in sets of 3 people. Um, Millions of people is just a completely different thing. If you have, I mean, what would it mean to have a million people in space, right? That means you're going to have probably manufacturers, right? That's probably the first thing that we want to send people into space for, just like producing things that we can't produce here on Earth. Then you're going to have like resource extractors. So these are like very, maybe industry heavy. You can think of like the frontier kind of a mindset from the 19th century in the United States as like a potential analog. But soon after you have those types of industries, what comes to fill in um, some of the gaps there are services, right? Providing food, providing some kind of shelter, providing entertainment. Like there are services that need to start to be provided to the people who are working on these resource extraction and processing um, industries. And so by doing that, you're providing a whole other set of industries. And now you've created an economy, you've created a society, you've created a civilization that exists in this other realm. And all of those people aren't going to exist there for extended periods of time if they're not in one way or another comfortable. So in terms of like building a home, maybe home is a little bit too terrestrial of a term to use. But we need to be able to design for the human body and the human mind in a manner that is comfortable in this very foreign context, um, that is inherently
Yeah.
hostile to our biology.
Yeah,
Um,
we don't really need we don't really need a home. We just need a backyard, a grill, some beers, and a good, extraterrestrial podcast, the content
yeah,
podcast.
no, that would be good. But uh, like so that just to kind of get back to the first or the question that was leading up to that second question, Tarik, like so space architecture is certainly a component of all of this, but there are aspects about redefining how we live in cities that is something that really interests me as well. Hence the whole like resource ecology discussion that we're having earlier, disaggregating things that are around us into unit parts so that we can recycle them. That is like a part of redefining what it means to live in cities. But there's also this notion of being able to provide new structures, new development without destroying communities. Right? You get the sense like you go to Long Island City right now, that place is completely changed. It feels
Yeah.
so sterile, right? There's got to be a better way of creating new structures that doesn't destroy a community. It's going to change the way it feels, right? But there's got to be a better way of doing it. And for the sake of time, I'll just leave it at like there's some ideas that myself and a few people have been talking about that we'd like to explore further. Um, and there's a good amount of synergies between that and the resource ecology or the cyclical economy. Um, but yeah, maybe that's for another discussion. That's something we're still fleshing out.
All right. And I got another question perfectly lined up for you. So, yeah, just from what you said, the idea, or as I like to say, the question came, which is you're going to need some political support, of course, at the same time, right? Because, yeah, the private industry can design it, but politics is basically like the biggest like distribution channel that exists currently. I mean, media, but the media is shaped by the politics around it. So essentially, what I'm asking is, I'm leading into a political question, so prepare yourself. Yeah, who did you support uh,
All right.
in the current elections? At least in the primaries. I don't personally care that much who you want for president at this point, but I'm more curious. Yeah, and if you are politically literate right now, or up to date rather, it's the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. The I this election has been so wild in that I generally don't believe in um like holding the party line. Right? I think that that's actually pretty unproductive and a lazy way of going about being a citizen of a republic. Um, but but it felt like for a lot of the positions for the federal government, at least I had to do that this year simply because of the clusterfuck that's been the past 4 years. It's uh, we're in such in my sense we're in such damage control um, that that yeah I mean to name it completely, I voted Democrat across the board, which is something that I haven't done in the past. And again, that's for like the national positions, right? The federal positions. For state, um, I figure there's a little bit more leeway there, and I kind of licked my wounds, comforted my ego in giving in to that sticking to the party line thing, um, by being a little bit more in tune with what people were providing there and trying to kind of balance out almost who I'm voting for. Right, so I won't vote for anything that I don't believe in, but there are a lot of gray areas, right? You look at two different personalities, and you're like, you're both making great points. One seems like a great manager, and the other seems like a great leader, someone that has like a really good vision. But I don't know how well you're going to facilitate that vision. and for some reason one lands in a Democrat side and the other lands on a Republican side. Neither really conveys any kind of craziness that I wouldn't necessarily want. So which one am I going to go for? That's usually a pretty difficult decision. But this year, I guess on the state level, it's been a little bit easier because I was able to kind of balance things out based on what I was doing at the national level. Yeah, I don't know. Is that answering your question? I feel like I might have not addressed the
Kind
point
of.
that you
You,
were
you
looking
you did
for.
you did your whole therapy thing where you dodged around the actual question, but
Wait, do you want me to like name like the actual candidates that I
you don't
voted
have to
for
tell me who
president,
you
or
voted for, but tell me who you liked as a person in the private space industry. Who do you think is
in the
best in
private
your
space industry?
interest?
Oh, I didn't hear that part. I think you said in the primaries.
Yeah, I did say in the primaries. But I'm rephrasing the question. Basically,
Okay.
who do you like the most from the primaries time, like from when we saw all the candidates? Who do you think was best in your interest?
Um, it kind of oscillated as the debates went on and as I learned more about each person's policy. I really I was a big Bernie person in 2016. Um, uh, really enjoyed some of the things that he talked about, which was kind of ironic because in 2008 I was a big Ron Paul person, and so I went from like libertarian to like socialism, which is, and I don't really identify with either. Um, So I like it, just like do good for the country, basically, right? Be an honest person that has a good vision. Maybe like the thing that is attracting me the most. But I found that to be an interesting oscillation for this primary. I found Pete Buttigieg to be quite interesting. I mean, for one thing, he provided a great vision, new blood, and all that. Andrew, is it Andrew Yang?
Yeah,
Um,
that was fun.
was fantastic. I was actually really rooting for him at the beginning. There were some things about his plans that did trouble me a little bit. I don't. Uh, I think that it was a great thing to bring into the public consciousness and to start that discussion. Um, I think he in the comparison that I was making earlier, I think he makes a great leader, a great visionary. I don't know if he makes a good manager because again, there were details about his plan that I had a little bit of a question mark on. Where Pete Buttigieg seemed like a healthy balance of the two. Um, Elizabeth Warren was great to watch, great to listen to. I really like her policies. Very polished. Um, there were there were aspects because she has been in politics for so long and people change over time. This is a natural thing that you will find. But there were things that she had said previously that she kind of went against now. And with people who are, you know, since people are people, you try to give them the benefit of the doubt. But there were moments where I found like a little bit of a question mark there. Pete Buttigieg, from what I saw, didn't have a long enough history to really like have anything like that highlighted. But I mean, you know, you look at anyone that's been around for long enough, and like Bernie's the only exception because he's been crazy
Yeah.
from day one. But you know, that exists with Biden, that exists with Hillary Clinton. Um, a lot of just very experienced people have that. So yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting run. Um, I guess the person that I most reliably enjoyed was Pete Buttigieg, and I still don't know if I'm saying his name correctly. I'm hoping that I am.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
Buttigieg. So I gotta just kind of throw this one in there. We're getting close to time. So
Yeah.
but I gotta
But
say
we also lost some time with my
yeah,
computer
exactly.
freezing up and all that. So
But yeah, Fedor, you have never asked an American how they feel about Trump. I noticed that. Like we have never had that exchange. So do you
Yeah,
want to
and
ask him?
I'm not gonna
You're not
ask,
gonna
of
ask
course.
him.
I'm gonna no. Hold on.
I mean, I think you kind of got a sense of where I was on that when I'm calling us when I'm saying that we're in damage control at the moment. I think that's pretty transparent.
I'm not gonna ask,
Yeah,
yo.
we got Colby Covington on the line. All right.
Oh my god. That's
Yeah,
do you know the show Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yeah, he
I
doesn't
don't
know.
know
There's
that show.
you know Seinfeld?
No,
No? Oh my god.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's
Well,
not
no.
that Americanized yet. You know, he's still.
there's that's fair. There's an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where David starts wearing the MAGA hat to get out of like lunch and dinner commitments. He would like go and meet up with them, and they would get so uncomfortable that they would leave. And he enjoyed that. So that was,
Yeah, I started to feel it. I started to feel the tension.
yeah, no,
Exactly.
it's good. But I mean, that's
You got to
I mean,
put that in the
I don't want to.
thumbnail. You know.
Yeah, right. I don't want to push the time too far out, but since you've opened that door, Tarik, I feel like I should ask, like, what is your whole take on kind of America-Russian relations right now? The whole like thing about like meddling with elections, the confrontations or um, the conflicts that are happening in kind of like the northern East areas.
Yeah,
Um,
we got the whole Armenia Azerbaijani issue going on. You know,
yeah, I mean,
Turkey and Russia
the
playing.
conflict seems to keep relocating. There are like all these proxy conflicts
Yeah.
that seem to be playing out between the United States and Russia.
Well, yeah, it's a good question, sir. Thank you for asking. We don't get too many questions of us on this podcast, right? Only a few
Uh,
guests have actually asked us some questions, so thank you for that. But
Yeah,
yeah, to weigh in on that, Russian American relations is a mess as always, but it's a issue of a greater problem, which is how diplomacy has been going down since this administration came into power. There's been a consistent devaluing of diplomacy, and it's there's a lot of factors in there. I'm not gonna. There's a lot of details to discuss on that, but I think it's about it's about the president's strategy, and I would say I'm a balanced enough person and just understanding how the media works is that I'm not really painted in any particular way. I understand the system like sufficiently enough to know that any particular character that comes into that responsibility has a lot of factors and a lot of ways to go about doing what he does. And there's always going to be people on both sides who are going to critique him. Who, you know, there's going to be available things to critique, and so thus they're going to be food for the media.
you're
So
talking about Trump or Putin?
I'm talking about heads of state in general. In general,
Okay.
at all heads of state will always have some weakness or something that the media is going to point out constantly and make
Of
everyone
course.
feel like this person is not the right person for the job. When in fact, I kind of agree with Joe Rogan. There is no one who's the perfect head of state. There is no one who could
Mm.
really manage the world on that level. So understanding that, the way I see it is, all right. So like I touched on, diplomacy has been going down under this administration. That's their strategy. They feel like the world is in a place where they need to relate more to their base, talk more to people who directly support them. And maybe that's because of how close it was in 2016. Maybe it's the fact that they have been constantly losing the popular vote, that the Republican strategy has now opened up to letting characters like Donald Trump represent them because it
Mhm.
appeals more to that popular vote. So this is going to be kind of like a big experiment for them this election. But in terms of, back to the question, Russian American relations, it's always going up and down, especially with this administration. Trump showed signs of courting Putin, but then, with the media, the constant backlash, he had to retract a lot of the things he said. So, as a person who has spent a lot of time understanding Russian society, Russian people, Russian politics, and then also American, and then also globally. My opinion is that it's gonna be a long time before we can see some actual bridges being built between these kind of superpowers, because at this point the competition has been raised. I would say, the Cold War was like the beginning of it, or World War II essentially was like, we have these areas of the world that are now so powerful that we could end the world itself. And now we're gonna skip a little bit past the Cold War, which is the whole waiting game of like, yeah, are you guys gonna come over here or are we gonna go over there? And now, and then 9/11 was another example, but all these kind of factors have pushed us into this superpower nation state environment where nobody wants to really give in and nobody really wants to start anything too serious. So the games being played now are like, all right, how bad can we make you look? And what is the most covert or like hard to prove way to do it? So the game is being played on both sides. So essentially, yes, are Russians trying to derail our election? Absolutely. Who wouldn't do that? If you were playing a basketball game, we'll use this example, and during the game you realize, oh, your opponent misses the shot every time you say like, oh, you guys have a horrible human rights record on dealing with your population, or
great basketball analogy there.
your white population hates your black population, so they're constantly missing these shots. It's just the level of the game, right? It's the mental warfare that's going on. So until we see some really major political movements, which we're starting to see, I would say in the last few years, we're starting to see some really major protests that have global effects. And I think that's a main kind of new aspect of these revolts that we've been seeing, is they're organized in one place in the world, but they're getting support all over the world. I mean, we there have been other examples of that, but the scale is different, right? Because the internet gives a lot more people access, and also ways to look at the issue have been expanded, because you're not just getting your news from the TV, which is kind of one-way communication. So yeah, essentially to sum all of these things that I brought up, American-Russian relations are in the same kind of place as the world is with this new communication field. There are people who are abusing it. There are things that are being done behind the scenes that we don't know as a public. And my opinion is the only real people who have like a stake in these kind of games that they're playing are the actual politicians and the military. So but we as people can, like I said, make an effect. We can show our voice through these protests and organizing ourselves. But the only way it's actually going to get better is if we as a people organize and really create a disruption of the games that they're playing that's going to make them have to either reveal a lot of things, or they will be revealed by journalists and other people who are investigating what's going on. And eventually, yeah, it'll come to like a critical mass where I think not only, as you've been saying, like cities will be redesigned, but the whole structure of society and how people see each other, how we understand like the supply and demand of life, of what it takes to live, and just like money, and how we let that affect who has power and who has the ability to live. So I hope I have touched on a lot of things, in this little talk, but I hope that kind of answers what you may have been asking about.
That's an interesting take. What about you?
Me?
Yeah.
Those relationships are on the Contrast podcast. That's my response to it. I'm a political illiterate person. I don't really care that much. But yeah, speaking on this, local level, like people to people, human to human communication. Yeah, Americans, you fuckers, been the greatest and the pleasant talkers, that I have ever met. So how can I bullshit on America? It's like, yeah, politically wise, well, yeah, but on this, like, yeah, just hold my beer, man. Relax. Let's just talk about Putin, interventions, Crimea, oh fuck, a lot of shit. But it is my personal opinion that, yeah, on the one hand, I don't really talk about it because we oftentimes have so much shit to talk about in the first place, like personal philosophies, space. So there is no really time left for that, you know. But on the other hand, I feel like I started to understand your point, Tarik, and why you've been kind of preaching about politics all the time. And we have talked previous podcast about it, but yeah, I'm still getting this, acquaint with the whole notion of politics. But yeah, they don't really affect me how I look at this, personal relationships that
Mhm.
much. Russia interfere. All right, America did that fucked up shit. All right, dude, let's talk about it. That's it,
That's
That's
good.
my
I
take.
I like that, and I think that that's an important note, right? Not to allow politics to interfere with interpersonal relations. That's
Eh,
a lot of people can take a page from your book in that regard. That's
damn, the whole
like
chapter,
yeah, the
you're
whole
the
chapter, man. Yeah, amen. It's like that's one of the problems with right now. I think it's just I haven't been good about keeping up with this, but at one point I was listening to. At first, I wanted to listen to as neutral of a news source as possible, so I started listening to like just BBC World Service, which is good, and I keep up to date with that, and some like financial news because at the end of the day, the bias that they have is just like where can you make money. For the most part, that's a little inaccurate. They tend to be a little left leaning, but to kind of look at the extreme ends, I started listening to something that people would consider very liberal and something that people would consider fairly conservative without getting into like not into like the crazy radical ends where like people are spouting incorrect things, but just like heavily leaning news organizations. So I started listening to Democracy Now, and I think it was like National Review, right? Um, and it was nice to just kind of hear what both sides had to say. I mean, ultimately, there are large groups of people that believe both, think in the way I believe implies that there's like some kind of they think in that line of thinking, right? And so it's good to appreciate that spectrum. And I think that there isn't enough of that right now. Um, the belief that because you think differently from me, you are a bad person, right? Because you align with a certain political belief, you're a bad person, or you're just like not worth my time. I'm just like not going to talk to you. It's such an unfortunate state. And at this point, this isn't like an original thought. I'm happy to see that a bunch of people have started saying that. So I think people are getting kind of fed up with how crazy the divide is. But there's still so much anger out there. Um, all that's to say, I agree with you. Don't let politics interfere with interpersonal relations.
Yeah,
Have
it's
political
it's
discussions,
interesting.
but
Yeah,
uh,
I just wanna add a little thing because on this podcast and into this, yeah, like cross cultural international relationships. Me personally, I don't really represent Russia. I rather represent that community, like people guests on the podcast, because I guess I'm not that Russian anymore. I don't really have my ID. It's expired. I barely speak Russian in this country.
mm,
I only talk with like, non-Russian people. So how Russian am I, right? Or when Tarik was traveling all across the globe. And it's a funny thing, man, because last time we talked with Randy, And before I was like, yo, Russia and America are so the same, like one side, two sides of the same coin. But after talking to Randy, I realized the gap, the ultimate difference between those two cultures. But as Tarik represents America, I feel like, wow, no, we're super close. So Tarik brings this feeling of humbleness, welcoming, and easy, digestible feel to me in sort of this international relation and a connection to America. So
you're saying Tarik should be a diplomat.
Definitely, definitely. So I use this metaphor as an airport. We are all into this in the airport, and we're just waiting for our flights. And in the meantime, you're just trying to have a coffee with somebody. Oh, you flying word. Oh, Egypt. All right, dude, let's have a talk. No problem. Shout outs to Zia, Contrast Podcast #2. Yeah, this was the random person, random character sitting on the doorstep of my dorm. And I was just like, yo, man, you're actually starting a podcast? Let's do it.
Is this the guy that was like, this was the one where he was sitting next to you? He was in the same frame as you?
Yeah.
Wow, we got a fan over here.
You gotta do your research,
Yeah, all right.
So basically, exactly, like this surreal virtual airport. That's how I call it. That's my nation. That's the place that I represent and I'm willing to represent. If you're gonna ask me some political stuff about Russia or historical aspects, I might be really blurry on that. But as for this international relationships, yeah, I'm all in. So yeah, that's my response to it.
That's great, man. And yeah, I really like that. Also a good way of not answering the question.
Exactly. Yo, put it style,
No, but I really like that.
Yeah, but time is about to gotta wrap this up a little fast.
Yeah.
It was another great podcast. Look at that, one after the other,
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was I really enjoyed the discussion. You guys are super insightful. I love the probing, the challenging questions, the fact that it was difficult to answer some of the things. That's like always fantastic. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, man. Absolutely for giving us some of your time. We're still in the early stages of this project, but we're hoping to grow it. So I got to put it in here, I guess. Everybody, if you made it this far, like and subscribe, please. It helps us get to the goals that we want, and those goals.
Click this button here.
Yeah. Go over there. Those goals, I promise, as the co-founder at this time, will come back to you in some way. If you show us love, we will show you love. That's the kind of principles that we have here. So in some way or another. But yeah, again, thank you, Mako, for your time. We would love to have you again. Kind of an idea I had in this podcast is that we're going to be checking in with a lot of the people that we've talked to over the years and see how their thinking has evolved, thinking how their circumstances have changed and things like that. So definitely.
I would love that. That sounds great. I mean, I feel like that we touched on a lot of things, and I think we can continue talking about a lot of those things. There are definitely going to be developments. So
exactly.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks again. And thanks everyone watching it.
All right, everybody.
See you next time.
See you.
Cool.
Peace out.
Thank you. See ya.